I'm 32 years old and my name is Corinne. For 5 years, I tried everything to fit into my husband Derek's tight-knit family. I learned their inside jokes, memorized their stories, and smiled through their subtle jabs. The annual family BBQ was always an ordeal, but I showed up with homemade desserts and a practiced smile. I never imagined that one summer afternoon in suburban Boston, a single cruel joke would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments below and hit subscribe to join me for more true stories about the moments that changed everything. I grew up in a middle-class family in Madison, Wisconsin. My parents worked in education, Dad as a high school math teacher and Mom as a librarian. We lived comfortably but modestly. Family gatherings were casual affairs with paper plates and potluck dishes. Nobody dressed up or worried about impressing anyone. We just enjoyed being together. After high school, I moved to Boston for college on a partial scholarship to study graphic design. I worked part-time jobs to cover the rest of my expenses, determined to build a creative career. By the time I graduated, I had secured an entry-level position at a small design agency. My life was unfolding exactly as I had planned, until I met Derek. It happened at a friend's art gallery opening. I was there to support my roommate who had a few pieces in the show. Derek was 30 tall with dark hair and a confidence that immediately drew me in. He approached me while I was studying an abstract painting, pretending to understand its significance. "What do you think the artist was trying to say with the blue triangle?" he asked with a playful smile. "That they ran out of red paint," I responded, and he laughed. Derek worked in finance, a world completely different from mine. He was intelligent, ambitious, and seemed genuinely interested in my creative perspective. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and by the end of the night, he had my number. Our romance progressed quickly. Derek took me to restaurants I could never afford on my own. He introduced me to fine wines and weekend getaways, to places I had only seen in magazines. After just 8 months, he proposed during a sunset dinner on Martha's Vineyard. The ring was stunning, a family heirloom that had belonged to his grandmother. How could I say no? I was 27 in love and certain I had found my forever partner. It was after the engagement that I first met Derek's family. They lived in an affluent suburb of Boston, in a colonial-style home with perfectly manicured gardens. His father, William, was a prominent surgeon. His mother, Elaine, was involved in various charity boards and social committees. Derek was the middle child, sandwiched between his older sisters, Amanda and Jessica, and his younger brother, Tyler. The first dinner with them was intimidating. Their dining room had an actual chandelier. They used cloth napkins for a regular family meal. Everyone spoke with perfect grammar and subtle references to their recent European vacation or fundraising gala. "Corinne is from Wisconsin," Derek announced, as if introducing an exotic specimen. "Oh, how quaint," Jessica responded, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She was 36, divorced, and worked as a marketing executive. "I don't think I've ever been there. Is there anything to do in Wisconsin?" "We have cheese," I joked nervously. The response was polite laughter that felt more like pity. As dinner progressed, it became clear that Derek's family operated on a different level of social hierarchy than what I was accustomed to. They discussed people I had never heard of, as if their names should be immediately recognizable. They debated the merits of various private schools and summer camps. They criticized the new neighbors who had "new money" written all over them. Yet they were never outright rude to me. They asked questions about my work and seemed to listen to my answers. William complimented my creative spirit, though the way he said it suggested that creativity was a charming but impractical quality. Elaine insisted I call her Mom, even though the word felt foreign on my tongue when directed at this elegant woman who didn't seem to have a single hair out of place. Tyler, the youngest at 28, was the only one who seemed genuinely warm. He asked specific questions about my design projects and later showed me his photography portfolio. We connected over our shared creative interests. After that first meeting, Derek was eager to know my thoughts. "They loved you," he assured me before I could even formulate a response, and I wanted to believe him. So I ignored the subtle undercurrent of judgment I had felt and focused on the positive. They had welcomed me into their home. That was a start. Over the next few months leading to our wedding, I made countless efforts to fit in with the Williams family. I observed how they dressed and spent too much of my savings on similar outfits. I practiced pronouncing certain words the way they did, softening my Midwestern accent. I researched the authors and musicians they referenced so I could participate in their conversations. Our wedding was larger and more elaborate than I had envisioned. Elaine had strong opinions about everything from the venue to the flowers to the menu. Whenever I expressed a preference that differed from hers, Derek would gently suggest that his mother had more experience with these things. My parents looked uncomfortable in their department store formal wear, surrounded by Derek's family friends and designer labels. After the honeymoon, Derek and I moved into a townhouse that his parents helped us purchase. It was in a neighborhood I could never have afforded on my own, closer to his family than to my workplace. I was grateful, of course, but sometimes felt like a guest in my own home. As the years passed, I gradually lost touch with many of my old friends. Our lifestyles had diverged, and my weekends were often filled with obligations to Derek's family and their social circle. I video called my parents less frequently, finding it harder to bridge the growing gap between our worlds. Every family gathering with the Williams became an exercise in performance. I carefully monitored my language, my posture, my reactions. I became hyper-aware of small dismissals, conversations that stopped when I approached inside jokes that were never explained, questions about my career that subtly suggested I should be doing more. Amanda would ask if my little design job was still fulfilling, implying it was a hobby rather than a profession. Jessica would comment on my appearance with backhanded compliments. "That dress is so bold. I could never pull off something so casual at a dinner party." William would introduce me to his colleagues as Derek's wife who does something artistic, never remembering exactly what I did. Derek never seemed to notice these microaggressions. When I pointed them out, he would insist I was being too sensitive or misinterpreting their intentions. "That's just how they talk," he would say. "They're actually trying to connect with you." Over 5 years, I became increasingly isolated. I had molded myself to fit into Derek's world, but the shape I had taken left me unrecognizable to myself. I had become someone who checked the label of a wine bottle before commenting on its taste, someone who apologized for having the wrong opinion about a film, someone who spent hours preparing for family gatherings that always left me emotionally exhausted. Yet even with all my efforts, I remained an outsider. The message was never stated explicitly, but it was communicated in 1,000 subtle ways. I was not truly one of them, and I never would be. The annual Williams family BBQ was a tradition that dated back to Derek's childhood. Unlike their usual formal gatherings, it had the appearance of casualness, outdoor seating, grilled food, and slightly more relaxed dress code. But make no mistake, it was still a performance with its own set of unspoken rules. In the week leading up to that fateful Saturday in July, my anxiety grew steadily. I had already endured 4 of these BBQs, each one leaving me more drained than the last. This year, Elaine had decided to expand the guest list to include family friends and colleagues, raising the stakes even higher. "My mom wants you to make those brownies everyone liked last year," Derek mentioned casually over breakfast. "Everyone liked them. Your sister Amanda said they were too rich, and your mother asked if I had considered using a different brand of chocolate," I reminded him. Derek shrugged. "That's just constructive feedback. They obviously enjoyed them, or Mom wouldn't have requested them again." This was typical of our conversations. My perceptions constantly invalidated reality, rewritten to maintain the fiction that his family was perfectly welcoming. 3 days before the BBQ, I went shopping for a new outfit. I spent hours in various stores trying to find something that would meet the contradictory requirements of looking casual yet sophisticated festive, but not trying too hard. I finally settled on a sundress that cost more than I wanted to spend. When I got home and tried it on again, I hated how it looked, but it was too late to find something else. The night before the gathering, I found myself unable to sleep. I lay awake beside Derek, wondering when exactly I had become this person who dreaded social events, with her own family-in-law, who second-guessed her every word and action, who felt like an imposter in her own life. "I'm really not feeling well," I told Derek in the morning, a last-ditch attempt to avoid the inevitable. "Maybe I should stay home." He looked at me with a mixture of concern and suspicion. "You seemed fine last night. Is this about the BBQ? My family will be disappointed if you're not there. Would they, though? I wanted to ask, but instead I sighed and got out of bed. I'll be ready in an hour. I spent extra time on my appearance applying makeup that looked natural, but covered my stress breakout styling my hair in a way that wouldn't seem too elaborate for a backyard gathering. I packed my homemade brownies cut into perfect squares, arranged on a platter I had bought specifically for this occasion. The drive to Derek's parents' house was quiet. He was excited, mentally preparing to slip back into his role as the charming son and brother. I was rehearsing conversation topics and reminding myself to smile, to laugh at their jokes, to be agreeable but not too passive. When we arrived, the backyard was already filled with people. The setting was picture-perfect string lights hanging from trees round tables covered in crisp white tablecloths, flower arrangements that looked effortlessly elegant. William was at the grill wearing an apron that said "Grill Master," but still somehow looking distinguished. Elaine floated between groups of guests, the consummate hostess. "Derek, Corinne, you made it." Elaine greeted us with air kisses. "Derek, your father could use your help with the grill. Corinne, you can put those in the kitchen. We have quite a spread already." In the kitchen, I found Jessica arranging a charcuterie board. Her hair was styled in loose waves, her casual linen dress probably costing more than my monthly student loan payment. "Oh, you brought brownies again," she noted, barely glancing at my platter. "Your mom requested them." I explained, feeling defensive already. Jessica shrugged. "I think we have plenty of desserts, but more is always merrier, right? Could you grab those napkins for me? The good ones in the dining room drawer, not the paper ones." I did as asked, swallowing my irritation. Back outside, I tried to integrate myself into conversations, but found myself constantly on the periphery. People would include me briefly, then the discussion would shift to topics, or people I knew nothing about. Derek was surrounded by a group of his father's colleagues, completely in his element. I noticed how different he was here, more animated, more confident, laughing more loudly. It was like watching an actor step into a familiar role. The Derek I lived with at home was quieter, often tired from work content to watch TV in comfortable silence. This Derek was a social butterfly, charming everyone within radius. Tyler found me standing alone by the flower garden and handed me a glass of wine. "How are you holding up?" "That obvious, huh?" I attempted a smile. "Only to someone who's paying attention," he replied. "Don't worry, this will be over in a few hours." His kindness was a lifeline, but even that brief moment of connection was interrupted when Jessica called everyone to lunch. The tables had been arranged in a U-shape, with William and Elaine at the head. Derek and I sat in the middle, surrounded by family, friends, and relatives. The food was served buffet style, but there was nothing casual about the presentation. Even the corn on the cob looked elegant. I sat quietly picking at my food, trying to be invisible, while paradoxically longing to be truly seen. The conversation flowed around me. Local politics, someone's recent renovation, a mutual friend's divorce. I nodded at appropriate intervals, laughed when others laughed. Jessica, seated across from me, was in rare form. She had recently been promoted at work and was regaling everyone with stories of her importance. She mentioned firing an assistant who had made too many scheduling mistakes. She begged for another chance, but honestly, no one even noticed she was gone after a week, Jessica said, cutting her grilled chicken into precise pieces. "Some people just don't make an impact, you know." There were murmurs of agreement around the table. "Speaking of which," Jessica continued, her eyes landing on me with a glint that made my stomach clench, "if you disappeared tomorrow, Corinne, no one would even notice." The table went silent. For a moment I thought I had imagined the words, but Jessica's smirk confirmed I hadn't. Then someone chuckled, then someone else. And suddenly almost everyone at the table was laughing, including Derek. My husband was laughing at the suggestion that my absence would go unnoticed. Time seemed to slow down. My face burned with humiliation. My throat closed up. Under the table, my hands trembled so badly I had to clasp them together. I looked at Derek, waiting for him to defend me, to say something, anything. But he was still smiling, reaching for his beer, as if what had just happened was perfectly normal. Something inside me, something that had been bending and accommodating and shrinking for 5 years, finally snapped. With a calmness that surprised even me, I raised my hot dog still in its bun, as if making a toast. Challenge accepted. I said, my voice quiet but steady. There was a beat of uncomfortable silence. Jessica's smile faltered. "Oh, come on, Corinne," Derek said, placing his hand on my arm. "It was just a joke." William cleared his throat. "How about those Red Sox think they have a chance this season?" And just like that, the moment passed. The conversation shifted. My pain was swept aside as easily as crumbs from the tablecloth. But something had changed. I sat through the rest of the meal in a state of strange detachment, as if watching the scene from above. I observed these people who had intimidated me for years, who had made me question my worth, who had treated me as an accessory to Derek rather than a person in my own right. They suddenly seemed smaller, pettier, less important. When dessert was served, no one commented on my brownies. I didn't care. The afternoon dragged on. I went through the motions, helping clear plates, smiling at appropriate times, answering questions with brief, polite responses. No one seemed to notice the change in me. No one asked if I was okay. The car ride home was silent. Derek turned on the radio, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. "That went well," he said eventually, "though you got a little quiet after lunch. Everything okay?" I looked at him, this man I had married, who had just sat by while his sister humiliated me, who hadn't noticed or cared about my feelings. "Everything's fine," I replied, turning to look out the window. In my mind, I was already packing. That evening, Derek and I moved around our townhouse like strangers sharing a temporary space. He turned on a basketball game, opened a beer, and settled into his usual spot on the couch. I made a cup of tea and said I had some work to finish in our home office. Instead of working, I sat at my desk and stared at the wall, thinking through what I was about to do. Was I overreacting? Was one cruel joke at a family BBQ really worth upending my entire life? But it wasn't just one joke. It was 5 years of subtle exclusion. 5 years of Derek never standing up for me. 5 years of shrinking myself to fit into a space that was never designed to accommodate me in the first place. I opened my laptop and checked our bank accounts. We had a joint checking account for household expenses, but I had maintained my personal savings account from before our marriage. There was enough there to give me a temporary cushion, about $8,000 I had squirreled away from my freelance projects. I waited until Derek went to bed. He kissed me absently on the cheek, not noticing that I barely responded. Within 20 minutes, I heard his steady breathing as he fell asleep untroubled by the day's events. At midnight, I quietly pulled a suitcase from our closet and began packing. What do you take when you're leaving your life behind? I grabbed practical items first: clothes, toiletries, medications. Then came the sentimental things: a photo of my parents, a sketchbook from college, a small ceramic bird my grandmother had given me. I left behind anything Derek had given me, including my wedding and engagement rings, which I placed on his nightstand. I also left the clothes I had bought to impress his family, the uncomfortable shoes I wore to their events, the cookbook Elaine had given me with numerous passages highlighted to improve my recipes. Looking at the suitcase, I was struck by how little I was taking from 5 years of marriage, how little of this shared life had actually been mine. I wrote a brief note on the notepad we kept by the phone: "Taking your sister's challenge. Don't try to find me." I considered writing more, explaining my feelings, expressing my hurt. But what was the point? Derek had never truly heard me when I was standing right in front of him. The hardest part was leaving the bedroom for the last time. Derek was sleeping peacefully, one arm flung across what had been my side of the bed. For a moment, I remembered the early days of our relationship. His smile across a crowded gallery, the way he used to look at me like I was the most interesting person in the room, the dreams we had shared. When had that man disappeared? Or had I simply imagined him? I wheeled my suitcase quietly through our home, taking one last look at the tastefully decorated rooms that had never quite felt like mine. At the door, I hesitated. Was I really doing this? Leaving in the middle of the night like a thief? Jessica's words echoed in my head: "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." And Derek's laughter following them. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and didn't look back. Driving through the silent streets at 2 in the morning gave me an unexpected sense of freedom. With each mile that separated me from the townhouse, I felt the weight on my chest lightening. I checked into a hotel on the outskirts of Boston using my maiden name. The night clerk barely looked at me as he handed over the keycard. In the anonymous hotel room, the reality of what I had done hit me all at once. I sat on the edge of the bed and began to shake. Tears came, not gentle, quiet tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that bent me double. I cried for the marriage I thought I had. I cried for the woman I had been before I met Derek. I cried for all the times I had swallowed my hurt to keep peace. Eventually, the tears subsided. I washed my face with cold water and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were swollen, my face blotchy, but underneath the distress, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: determination. I slept fitfully, waking every few hours. By dawn, I had a plan. The next morning, I was waiting outside a bank when it opened. I withdrew most of the money from our joint account, only what I had contributed through my own paychecks, leaving Derek's deposits untouched. I opened a new account at a different bank using my maiden name. At a coffee shop with Wi-Fi, I sent a resignation email to my workplace, citing a family emergency that required me to leave Boston immediately. I felt a twinge of regret. I had liked my job and my colleagues, but I couldn't risk Derek finding me through my employment. My phone had been buzzing all morning. Derek had woken up, found my note, and was now alternating between angry messages, demanding explanations, and pleading texts, asking me to come home so we could talk. I turned off my phone without responding to any of them. I called my old college roommate Sarah using the coffee shop's phone. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, another casualty of my marriage, but she answered on the third ring. "Sarah, it's Corinne. I know this is out of the blue, but I'm in trouble. Not legal trouble," I clarified quickly, "but I've left my husband and I need a place to stay for a few days. Are you still in Chicago?" There was a pause on the line. "Corinne. Oh my God, yes, I'm still here. What happened? Are you okay?" "I will be," I said, my voice breaking. "But I need to get away from Boston, from everything." Without hesitation, Sarah said, "Come. My couch is yours for as long as you need it." I felt a rush of gratitude so intense it brought fresh tears to my eyes. This was a true friend, someone who hadn't heard from me in years but was immediately ready to help. I bought a burner phone, sent Sarah my new number, and hit the road. The drive to Chicago would take about 14 hours, but I didn't mind. Those hours alone in the car became a kind of therapy. I listened to music I liked, not what Derek preferred. I stopped when I wanted to, eating at roadside diners where no one cared about my table manners. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes I screamed along to angry songs. Sometimes I laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of what I was doing. By the time I crossed the Indiana state line, I felt more like myself than I had in years. Sarah lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Chicago's Rogers Park neighborhood. When she opened the door, she took one look at me and pulled me into a tight hug. I hadn't realized how touch-starved I was for genuine affection until that moment. "You look different," she said, helping me with my suitcase. "Different how? Thinner, sadder." She studied my face. "But also kind of fierce. I like it." Her apartment was cluttered and colorful, filled with books and art and mismatched furniture. It was the opposite of the carefully curated home I had shared with Derek, and I loved it immediately. That first night over pizza and wine, I told Sarah everything. The slow erosion of my identity during my marriage, the constant subtle put-downs from Derek's family, Jessica's cruel joke and everyone's laughter, my midnight escape. "I know it seems extreme," I finished, staring into my wine glass. "Walking away from 5 years of marriage without even a conversation. Maybe I should have tried harder to make it work." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Corinne, it sounds like you've been trying for 5 years. Sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do." The first week in Chicago was hard. I jumped whenever someone knocked on the door, convinced it was Derek, having tracked me down. I checked over my shoulder constantly when I went out. I had nightmares about being dragged back to a life that was suffocating me. Sarah helped me create a new email address and set up online banking. She lent me clothes when I realized much of what I had packed was still in the style I had adopted to please Derek's family. She introduced me to her friends without explaining my situation, simply saying I was staying with her for a while. After 10 days on Sarah's couch, I found a job at a local coffee shop. The pay was minimal, but it was cash in hand and required no background check or references. I worked morning shifts learning to make complicated espresso drinks and chatting with regular customers who didn't know or care about my past. The manager, Lucia, was a woman in her 50s with spiky gray hair and tattooed arms. She noticed my design portfolio one day when I was sketching during my break. "You've got talent," she said, looking through my drawings. "My brother runs a small printing company. They sometimes need freelance designers, want me to put in a word." That connection led to my first freelance project in Chicago, designing a brochure for a local theater company. The project was small but gave me a sense of professional identity again. I started building a new portfolio, creating designs that reflected my own aesthetic rather than what I thought would impress others. After a month with Sarah, I found a tiny studio apartment nearby. It was basically one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom so small you could barely turn around in it. But it was mine. I furnished it gradually with secondhand finds, creating a space that reflected who I was, not who someone else wanted me to be. I also reached out to my parents. This was one of the hardest calls I had to make. I had been distant with them during my marriage, ashamed of how I had prioritized fitting into Derek's world over maintaining my own family connections. "Mom, it's me. I have something to tell you," I said when my mother answered. The concern in her voice when I explained that my marriage was over broke my heart. Not because she was upset about the divorce, but because she immediately asked, "Were you unhappy all this time? Why didn't you tell us?" "I think I was trying to convince myself that I wasn't," I admitted. "My parents wanted to come to Chicago immediately, but I asked for time. I need to figure out who I am now, on my own, but I promise we'll see each other soon." I started therapy with a counselor at a community mental health center. During our sessions, I began to understand that what I had experienced was a form of emotional abuse, not just from Derek's family, but from Derek himself. His constant invalidation of my feelings, his dismissal of my concerns, his expectation that I would change to fit his world while he changed nothing to accommodate mine. "It wasn't physical," I said during one session, "so I never thought of it as abuse." "Emotional abuse leaves scars too," my therapist replied. "They're just harder for others to see." As the weeks turned into months, my freelance design work increased through word of mouth. I created a portfolio website using a variation of my name, cautious about Derek finding me online. I started taking on regular clients, mostly small local businesses that needed logos, brochures, or website designs. I opened a small business bank account and registered myself as a sole proprietor. Every step toward independence felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I had surrendered during my marriage. I also began to rebuild a social life. Sarah introduced me to her circle of friends, artists, teachers, nurses, retail workers, people who talked about their passions rather than their possessions, people who asked questions and actually listened to the answers, people who didn't care what brand of jeans I wore or if I used the correct fork. 6 months after leaving Boston, I had achieved a kind of stability. My studio apartment felt like home. My freelance business was generating enough income to cover my basic needs. I had friends who knew the real me, not the carefully constructed version I had presented to Derek's world. I had also changed physically. I stopped highlighting my hair the way Elaine had suggested would brighten my face. I got a tattoo, a small phoenix on my wrist that made me smile every time I saw it. I wore clothes with bright colors and patterns that Derek would have found too loud. On social media, I created new accounts under a variation of my name. I was careful not to post identifying information about my location, but I enjoyed connecting with other designers and former college friends. Through these carefully managed accounts, I learned that Derek had posted about our separation, portraying himself as the bewildered husband whose wife had inexplicably abandoned him. What surprised me most about my new life was how much I enjoyed my own company. After years of anxiously monitoring another person's moods and opinions, the simple freedom of deciding what to eat, what to watch, how to spend my time without considering anyone else's preferences was intoxicating. I started taking photography classes at a community center, discovering a new creative outlet. I joined a book club that met at a local library. I volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends. None of these activities would have fit into my life with Derek, where our social calendar was dominated by his family and work obligations. 10 months after I left, I received an unexpected email. It came to my new business address, which I had carefully kept separate from anything connected to my old life. The subject line simply read, "Are you okay?" The sender was Tyler Derek's younger brother. I stared at the email for a long time before opening it. How had Tyler found me? Should I be worried that Derek would show up at my door? Was this a trick? Finally, curiosity won out. The message was brief. "Corinne, I hope this reaches you. I've been worried about you since you left. No one else knows I'm contacting you, and I won't share your information if you respond. I just want to know that you're safe. Things have been strange here since you disappeared. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to explain. Tyler." I closed the laptop without responding. My heart was racing. Just seeing Tyler's name brought back memories of the Williams family, the dinners, the judgments, Jessica's cruel joke. But Tyler had always been different. He had been kind to me, had seemed to see through his family's pretensions. If anyone from my old life deserved a response, it was him. I waited a week debating what to do. Finally, I wrote back a short message. "Tyler, I'm safe and building a new life. How did you find this email?" His response came within hours. "I've been checking your old portfolio website regularly. When it recently linked to your new business site, I figured it was you from the design style. I won't tell anyone." I hadn't realized the connection between my old professional presence and my new one would be so obvious to someone looking for it. It was careless, but then again, I hadn't expected anyone from my past to be actively searching. Over the next few weeks, Tyler and I established a cautious correspondence. He was careful not to ask where I was living, and I was careful not to provide details that might reveal my location. Gradually, he shared what had happened after I left. "Derek didn't take it seriously at first," Tyler wrote. "He told everyone you were being dramatic and would come back in a few days. Jessica actually joked about her comment coming true, that no one noticed you were gone. It was pretty gross." That hurt, but it wasn't surprising. It confirmed what I had already known, that my worth in their eyes had always been minimal. After about a week, Tyler continued in another email. "Derek started getting worried. He filed a missing persons report, but since you had left a note and taken your things, the police didn't consider it a priority. That's when he started calling all your friends, your workplace, even your parents. No one knew anything, or if they did, they weren't telling him." I felt a pang of guilt about my parents. They had been caught in the middle receiving desperate calls from a son-in-law they had never quite warmed to, unable to tell him anything, because I had asked them not to. "Things got tense at family gatherings," Tyler explained. "Derek started blaming Jessica for her joke saying it had pushed you away. Jessica got defensive and said you were obviously unstable if you would leave your marriage over a harmless comment. Mom tried to smooth things over by suggesting you'd always been a bit sensitive. Dad mostly stayed out of it." I could picture the scene perfectly, the Williams family in their elegant dining room dissecting my character flaws rather than examining their own behavior. "But here's what's interesting," Tyler wrote. "As weeks passed and you stayed gone, people outside the family started asking questions. Derek's friends, colleagues, neighbors. The story of what happened at the BBQ got out, I think through one of the guests. Jessica faced some serious social backlash. Apparently making jokes about your sister-in-law disappearing isn't viewed kindly, especially when she actually does disappear." There was a certain poetic justice in that. Jessica, who had always been so concerned with appearances, was now facing judgment from her peers. Derek changed, Tyler's next email revealed. At first he was angry, then worried, then just sad. About 3 months after you left, he got drunk at my apartment and admitted that he had never stood up for you with the family, that he had seen how they treated you but had convinced himself it wasn't that bad. He said he didn't blame you for leaving. This was the first information that truly affected me. Derek had acknowledged his failure. He had seen the truth of our marriage. It was a validation I hadn't realized I still needed. "The family dynamics are different now," Tyler continued. "Derek doesn't come to dinner as often. Jessica and Mom got into a huge fight about whose fault it was that you left. Amanda actually defended you, saying we had all been unfair. Dad admitted he never made an effort to know you. It's like your absence forced everyone to look at themselves, and they didn't like what they saw." After about a month of correspondence, Tyler asked the question I had been dreading. "Would you consider talking to Derek just once? He's been in therapy. He understands how badly he failed you." My immediate instinct was to refuse. What could Derek possibly say that would matter now? But my therapist encouraged me to consider it. "Closure can be valuable," she said. "Not for him, but for you. You left suddenly, which was absolutely your right. But now you're stronger. You might want to hear what he has to say from this new position of power." I agreed to a phone call, not a video call where he could see my surroundings, and certainly not an in-person meeting. Tyler arranged it, giving Derek my burner phone number without revealing how he had been in contact with me. When the phone rang at the appointed time, my hand shook as I answered it. "Corinne." Derek's voice was exactly as I remembered, yet somehow it felt like hearing a stranger. "Yes," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Thank you for agreeing to talk to me," he said, and I was surprised by the humility in his voice. The Derek I had known was rarely humble. "I don't even know where to begin." "You could start with why you laughed," I suggested, "when your sister said no one would notice if I disappeared." There was a painful silence on the line. "I have no excuse," he finally said. "I laughed because it was easier than standing up to my family. I've been doing that my entire life, going along with their jokes, their judgments, their way of seeing the world, even when it hurt someone I claimed to love." His admission was more direct than I had expected. No defensiveness, no attempts to minimize what had happened. "After you left," he continued, "I was so angry at you for giving up on us without a conversation, but eventually I had to face that there had been countless conversations over the years, conversations where you told me you felt unwelcome, unvalued, unseen, and I dismissed every one of them." I closed my eyes remembering those conversations, the nights I had cried after family gatherings, the times I had tried to explain how isolated I felt, the suggestions I had made about creating boundaries with his family, all met with denial deflection or promises of change that never materialized. "I'm seeing a therapist now," Derek said. "I've been diagnosed with dependent personality disorder. I've spent my whole life seeking approval from my family, unable to separate my identity from theirs. It doesn't excuse how I treated you, but it helps me understand it." "I'm glad you're getting help," I said, and I meant it. "Where are you, Corinne? Are you okay?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm safe. I'm building a new life. That's all you need to know." "Are you with someone new?" The question held a note of jealousy that might once have gratified me. Now it just seemed irrelevant. "My life is my own now. I don't owe you details about it." He accepted this with a sigh. "You're right. You don't owe me anything. I'm the one who's in debt here." We talked for about 30 minutes. Derek told me about the aftermath of my departure, how my absence had created ripples through his family, forcing uncomfortable reflections, how Jessica had eventually sent a written apology that Tyler had offered to forward to me, how the annual BBQ tradition had been suspended, no one having the heart to continue it. "You leaving forced all of us to look at ourselves," Derek said, echoing what Tyler had told me. "My family isn't the same. Maybe that's a good thing." As our conversation wound down, Derek asked the inevitable question, "Is there any chance for us, if I continue therapy, if I prove I've changed?" I didn't hesitate. "No, Derek, that chapter of my life is closed." "I thought you might say that," he replied quietly. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For everything. You deserved so much better." After we hung up, I sat in my studio apartment, looking at the life I had built for myself. The colorful throw pillows I had chosen without considering anyone else's taste. The wall of photos documenting my new experiences. The desk where I created designs that represented my true aesthetic. Derek's apology hadn't changed my decision to leave, but it had released something inside me. A final tether to my old life, a lingering question about whether I had overreacted or misunderstood. Now I knew with certainty that I hadn't. My perceptions had been accurate, my pain had been real, and my decision to leave had been necessary for my survival. A week later, Tyler forwarded Jessica's apology letter. I read it once, noting the careful wording that managed to express regret while still preserving her dignity. There was no acknowledgement of the years of subtle digs and dismissals, only regret for the misinterpreted joke at the BBQ. I didn't respond to it. Some bridges are not meant to be rebuilt. 1 year after I walked out of my marriage, I celebrated my rebirth with a small dinner party in my new apartment. I had recently moved from the tiny studio to a one-bedroom place in the same neighborhood, a sign of my growing financial stability. Sarah was there, of course, the friend who had offered her couch without hesitation when I was at my lowest. Along with her came 3 other friends I had made in Chicago: Maya, a photographer I had met through my community classes; Damon, a chef from the cafe where I occasionally worked; and Luis, a graphic designer who had become both a friend and a professional colleague. My parents had finally visited a month earlier. The reunion had been emotional. Tears and hugs and long conversations about the years we had lost while I was trying to fit into the Williams family mold. They had toured my apartment, met my friends, and seen firsthand that I was thriving. My mother had held my face between her hands and said, "I see my daughter again. Welcome back." The dinner party was nothing fancy, just good food, wine, and people who genuinely cared about each other. As we gathered around my second-hand dining table, I looked at the faces of these people who had entered my life after I had blown it apart and felt a profound sense of gratitude. "I want to make a toast," I said, raising my glass. 1 year ago today, I was sitting at a very different table surrounded by people who made me feel invisible. I made the scariest decision of my life that night. I want to thank all of you for helping me build something real from the ashes of what I left behind. Sarah raised her glass. "To Corinne's Phoenix year, and to many more." After dinner, while Damon and Luis were arguing good-naturedly about a movie, and Sarah was helping Maya with a photography app, I stepped onto my small balcony for a moment alone. The Chicago night was cool, the city lights creating a landscape of possibility. I thought about the changes in my life over the past year. The most obvious were external: new home, new career path, new friends. But the most significant were internal. I had learned to trust my perceptions, to value my own comfort, to recognize when I was shrinking myself to please others. I had also faced some hard truths about myself: how I had been complicit in my own erasure, how I had chosen security over authenticity, how I had allowed myself to be defined by someone else's expectations. My freelance design business was growing steadily. I had developed a niche creating branding for small women-owned businesses, many of whom were also reinventing themselves after major life changes. There was something deeply satisfying about helping other women become visible in the ways they chose. Photography had evolved from a hobby into a second career path. I had begun shooting portraits for local artists and musicians, capturing images that reflected their true essence rather than a polished facade. My work had been featured in a small gallery show, and I had sold 3 prints, a modest success that meant the world to me. I had legally changed my name, not back to my maiden name, but to something new, a combination of my mother's maiden name and a chosen middle name that signified strength to me. It was a symbolic act of self-definition. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. Derek had not contested anything, agreeing to my minimal requests through his lawyer. There had been a small financial settlement, my share of the equity in the townhouse we had purchased together. I had accepted it and donated half to a domestic abuse organization that helped women rebuild their lives after leaving harmful situations. I hadn't spoken to Derek since our one phone call, though Tyler still emailed occasionally. I had met Tyler for coffee during his business trip to Chicago 2 months ago. It was strange seeing the face from my old life in my new context, but it had been a positive encounter. Tyler was the only member of the Williams family I maintained any connection with, and I suspected that would always be the case. As I stood on the balcony reflecting, Sarah joined me with a fresh glass of wine. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I was just thinking about Jessica's joke," I replied, "about how if I disappeared no one would notice." Sarah frowned. "What a cruel thing to say." "The irony is that by disappearing I became more visible than I've ever been. To myself, most importantly." I took a sip of wine. And from what Tyler tells me, my absence created quite a noticeable hole in the Williams family dynamic. "Karma's a bitch," Sarah said with a satisfied smile. Back inside, I looked at my apartment with fresh eyes. The walls painted a bold blue that Derek would have vetoed the mismatched furniture chosen for comfort, rather than style the art created by friends, rather than selected to impress visitors. My home was an authentic expression of who I was now. On my desk sat a project I was particularly proud of, a series of photographs and designs for a small nonprofit that supported women transitioning out of abusive relationships. The organization helped with practical matters, housing, employment, legal assistance, but also with the emotional journey of rediscovering identity after trauma. Working with these women had been healing for me. While my situation had been privileged in many ways, I had education savings, no children to consider. The emotional dynamics were familiar, the slow erosion of self, the adaptation to criticism, the constant effort to anticipate another's reactions, the fear of starting over. One afternoon after a workshop where I had shared some of my story with the group, a participant had asked me, "How did you find the courage to walk away with no plan?" I had thought carefully before answering. I realized that staying was costing me more than leaving ever could. That was the truth I had discovered in that moment at the BBQ when Derek laughed at his sister's cruel joke. The price of belonging to that family, of maintaining that marriage, was my very self, and no relationship was worth that cost. I had recently met someone new, a writer named James, who had interviewed me for a local arts magazine. Our connection had been immediate, but I was proceeding cautiously. I had learned to value my independence too much to rush into another relationship. James seemed to understand this content, to move at whatever pace felt right to me. As my birthday approached, I made a decision that felt both symbolic and practical. I started a support group for people reclaiming their identities after relationships that had diminished them. We met weekly in a community center room, sharing stories and strategies. Some were recovering from romantic relationships, others from family dynamics or workplace situations that had made them feel invisible. Leading this group became one of the most meaningful aspects of my new life. It transformed my pain into purpose, my experience into wisdom that could help others. 1 year after Jessica's cruel joke, I was not only noticed but truly seen, by my friends, by my clients, by the women in my support group, and most importantly, by myself. The woman who had sat at that BBQ swallowing her hurt while her husband laughed at her expense was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood her own worth, someone who would never again make herself smaller to fit into spaces that weren't designed to welcome her. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from what no longer serves us. Sometimes being forgotten by the wrong people is the pathway to being truly seen by the right ones, including ourselves. If I could go back to that moment at the BBQ table, I wouldn't change a thing. I would still raise my hot dog and say, "Challenge accepted." I would still pack my bag in the middle of the night. I would still drive away from a life that was slowly suffocating me. Because that moment of courage led me here, to this full, authentic life I had built from scratch, to this version of myself that no longer needed anyone else's validation to feel real and worthy and enough. Have you ever had to walk away from something to find yourself? Share your story in the comments below. And if you found strength in my journey, please subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and reinvention. Remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is disappear from where you're not valued and reappear exactly where you belong. Thank you for listening, and remember, you deserve to be truly seen.